Lost civilization. Lost city in the mountains, found only by the storms and the touch of lost gods. The long gray hairs of wicked witches light the sky, as razor-thin lightning charges the snowcaps. The witches' thunderous laughter splits stone over the branches of faded pine, rock slides crashing through, broomsticks striking cauldrons, crows spitting laughter at the ghosts of the end of the world. The only things that remain? The land, the sky, the monsters of ancient myths who grow weary and lonely for someone to haunt. The end of the world is a new world's beginning. The means to the death of one civilization is presumed by the manner in which that civilization is born, by blood or capture, by innovation, by chains, by will and vision, by conquest of nature or sublimation of men. There is no end that cannot be born. There is no eternal birth. The hope of life is in its inevitable end. The footprints of the past walk into the future. There will be ruins found. The ruins were weathered from mountain storms. Seen from a distance, a general outline of inorganic shapes stood out along a table of stone, a shelf of some scope overlooking the long, distant valley. The shelf wasn't entirely barren. Mountain grass and evergreens scattered where their roots could hold them upright against the elements. Closer, the details of these irregular inorganic shapes became clearer, as piles of broken walls, shattered cinder block, and preformed concrete shapes. The ruins resembled more natural hills and stones, their manufactured edges weathered and rounded from so many years of exposure. Even the outlines of foundations fell away to lumps of rough soil and grit. A few walls still stood among the piles of broken and buried structures, as isolated rebelling against eventual doom. Nature turns the modern and the manufactured into the abstract. Reinforcement steel pulled from concrete like nerves out of flesh appeared just as the gnarled branches of a cedar tree, buckled and brown. Wind and ice etched faces into the surfaces of concrete, unintended portraits of those souls lost to disaster, but faces only the haunted could see. The landing pad was set away from the complex. The edges of the pad had crumbled, eaten away from the encroachment of skunkweed and thin grass. The concrete was heaved through the center, the landing pad gradually pulling apart from the long-term expansion and contraction of frost and ice. Nature turns the modern and manufactured into dust. A small golf cart was tipped over in a clump of thistle and tall bottle brush. Little of the cart survived. The thin shreds of fiberglass shone more as the remnants of fur from a long rotted carcass. The wild-grown grass pressing against the dead machine waved in the growing wind, an easterly gust pressing down from the mountain slope overlooking the ruins. The golf cart wheels were rusted, the tires rotten. The fiberglass body frizzed where it hung on a tube steel frame, itself rotten as bones. The cement walkway leading to the complex was overrun with thin growth, roots and shoots creeping over the cement surface, digging in where a crack could be found. Even from the landing pad, the evidence was clear that the structure and surrounding complex had been obliterated by a sudden force. There had been little fire or flame, so the force was more concussive than explosive. The few standing structures that appeared out of the mountain haze upon landing had the appearance of ancient ruins. Construction materials that survived the blast were weathered down, sharp corners rounded, flat walls curved and hollowed. Wood and plastic were figments of themselves, hints of color and wood grain found under where a collapsing ceiling covered a row of desks and chairs. Flattened filing cabinets were shreds of rust, the paper contents long since gone, either burned from the heat of the initial blast that formed the concussion or dissolved from frost cycles. Streaks of copper shone through where plumbing or high-voltage cables had been pulled from the walls and floors. Nothing was spared the force of cataclysm. What wasn't smashed or sanded down by time was choked with weeds and animal nests. Alex Gale looked back at his craft, its profile as thin as a line between sky and land. The hull shone in the dimming light as a knife blade, shivering as it held itself over the surface against the erratic gusts coming from every direction. He just heard the engine hum, the machine his certainty for safety. As he flew in from the east, he tracked the storm front moving over the land, bursts of lightning lashing out from under the curtain of black clouds. Had he been born innocent, a creature unaware of the cause of things, lightning would appear as the legs or fingers of a vicious monster hidden in the sky. Once in the last month, he was grounded during such a storm while visiting a ruin in another mountain range. He didn't find what he was looking for, spending 2 weeks after the storm looking for alloy panels to repair the tear in the starboard wing. Much of the damage was superficial, but still required specialized tools for a comprehensive repair. The titanium skin either had to be welded or a section of the skin replaced. Alex had none of the tools or skills to accomplish this task. The last place he visited that would have had such facilities was unrecognizable as a place made by human hands, the stumps of streetlights and masonry the only indication of civilization for miles. It was a peculiar ruin for sure. The blast cut everything down as if a huge blade swung 3 feet over the ground. Everything above where the blade sliced turned to vapor and ash. There were so many cities like that, stumps of buildings and streetlights and towers and bridges half buried in their own ashes. Eventually his craft would be too damaged to repair. Either the power unit or the computer running the craft would fail, both of which were beyond Gale's ability to repair. Gale looked to the west, seeing the mountain snowstorm. He pinched his coat collar close under his chin and braced against the wind. From the landing pad, Alex ventured close to the largest structure in the complex. What he looked for wouldn't be visible immediately, perhaps lower in the structure, where the foundation was cut into the native stone a few levels below. There would be a door to a vault leading to what he was searching for. It could be here, protected by the mountains, safe from the force that destroyed the complex. Alex was hopeful, but aware that every disappointment since his first start of the mission added to the potential failure of the whole mission. Treasure hunter. What an absurdity. As Alex presumed himself to be the last man alive, he allowed himself a little fantasy. Had he seen another soul? No. There were indications from the limited equipment on the craft. Alex had no direct sighting. The time, as measured by the sunrises and sunsets, was also measured by the countdown clock on the craft's main console. Gale understood the months since he first woke as a running countdown to the last minute where the craft was functional, where one failure of a critical part ruined the craft for good. It was a death clock, so to speak, as the craft was the only means of Alex Gale's survival. Since Gale hadn't seen another human being, there was no way to learn what they knew to survive beyond the dependence he had on the craft. He was a man of the world just before its end. He was a piece of history. There were so many other priorities than hunting for treasure, but there was little else to do. Alex pulled a plastic sheath from his heavy coat. He tapped his finger on it as he scanned over the ruins for where this vault door could be. He pulled the paper he had been using as a treasure map out of his coat. He looked down a list of 30 sites and put a check mark by number 15 on the list. The Mountain Complex, number 23. That was all of the description. The Mountain Complex, with coordinates. Number 23 was one of 30 mountain settlements. Because of the limited capabilities of his craft, he had only visited 5 of these 30 mountain complexes. Several were beyond where the craft could go, and others required significant backtracking, which drained time and fuel. A few of the sites were hit directly, being only craters in the side of a mountain. As he would not reach all of the sites on the list, the destinations he did visit were little more than gambles. There was no other description, no indication of what he had come across, any dangers or hazards, as the list was drafted before the end of the world.